So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Afriadi. I represent my team from History Department of Faculty of Humanities, University of Indonesia, that led by Dr. Linda Sunarti, and another team member, Ibu Noor Fatia Lastika and Ibu Raisye Soleh Haghia. Today, we would like to present our research about Kebaya Setengah Tiang and Minang cultural identity in traditional custom of Negeri Sembilan, Malaysia. The Minangkabaus was one of the well-known ethnic groups in Nusantara, adopting migration process as their second nature. Migration had been practiced within the group since a long time ago, and therefore acquired as a habitual process for them in developing the community to date. In certain degree of individual mobility, they managed to reach various places, areas, or countries in all over the world. It was recorded that the Minangkabaus had been accustomed to take long journeys, such as the African East Coast, to meet the Malay communities in Madagascar. The Malay Peninsula area was one of the frequently visited areas by the Minangkabaus during the heyday of various Malay kingdoms outside of Sumatra. The arrival of Minangkabaus in the Malay Peninsula gave leverage to the local political, social, and cultural aspect. What the Minangkabaus brought to the Malay world affected Negeri Sembilan the most. The cultural transmission, as an example, was particularly seamless and integrated to the whole life aspect of the people in Negeri Sembilan. We could find cultural similarities between Minang and Negeri Sembilan in traditional cuisine, dances, as well as dresses. There were at least 3 varieties of traditional dress in Negeri Sembilan, with heavy influence from Minang culture. The traditional wedding dress, baju kurung ibu soko, and the kebaya setengah tiang, which were recognized by Malaysian Department of Culture and Arts or Jabatan Kebudayaan dan Kesenian Negeri JKKN as the exclusive dress of Negeri Sembilan. This article particularly discussed about kebaya setengah tiang as the most unique traditional dress from Negeri Sembilan, for it had combined various elements from overlapping cultural influence within the peninsular area of Southeast Asia. The influence came from Minang culture was obvious enough to be identified in the dress. Therefore, through this article, we tried to elaborate the identity of the Minangkabaus with this development along with the ever-expanding concept of merantau. The identity was believed to preserve up until today. Previous studies found on Kebaya Setengah Tiang mainly focus on the pattern of migration of the Minangkabaus to Negeri Sembilan, but least of the studies focus on the development of Minang culture and identities within the dress as one of example of cultural objects. Zed wrote about relation between Minangkabaus and Negeri Sembilan, while Omar and Nelmawarni researched on the rantau culture of the Minangkabaus in the Malay Peninsula. Pellet's research, titled Comparative Perspective on Kinship and Cultural Identity in Negeri Sembilan, as well as specific study on the social change in Rembau, Negeri Sembilan by Ibrahim. Most of the research found were keen on the matter of local tradition of Negeri Sembilan and issues involving around it. Moreover, we also found the work of De Jong, titled Islam versus Adat in Negeri Sembilan, and Golik, titled Law and the Adat Pepatih, a Problem from Jelebu. According to such literature study, we barely found a research taking Kebaya Setengah Tiang up as its main discussion. In regard to the discovery of recent issues on the Minangkabaus identity, therefore, this research meant to give an up-to-date analysis on Kebaya Setengah Tiang as medium of cultural interconnectedness through the lens of historians. Cultural identity was a set of characteristics of or features that was acquired and acknowledged by a group of people. The limitation of this identity was recognizable when we compared one characteristic to another. This also meant that in order to fully understand the establishment and development of cultural identity, we could start examining the values, feelings, ways, and orientations of thinking, as well as motives underlying this all, instead of empirically assess physically appearance or biologically traits. Kebaya Setengah Tiang was one of many examples that we could gather on the cultural identity of the people of Negeri Sembilan, Malaysia. The traditional dress was the result of a striving cultural adaptation process as a part of system of signs transmitted by the people to let their identities be known, as well as to make attachment between each self-identity to the communal identity. The communal identity reflected the narrative of origins and the ancestral value that had been preserved, the collective memory of the people living in Negeri Sembilan. This article was based on search and analysis of historical sources, which were then interpreted to produce historical explanation related to events and processes that took place against individuals or a group of people in society, in which depends on the determined context or particular space and time limitation. This research utilized textual sources that could be accessed on a limited basis due to restrictions imposed by government during pandemic. Thus, this article relied on literature studies and reviews of previous writings related to Minangkabau diaspora and the significance of traditional dresses in the Malay world, among others through books and journal articles. This article was based on the collected sources that construct historical writing that applies heuristics, sources criticism, interpretation, and historiography. Development of this article had also been projected further, one of which was the upcoming field research with online focus group discussion as the alternative to obtain the latest data through the collection of oral history belong in collective memory of the people of Negeri Sembilan, Malaysia. During the 15th and the 16th century, the migration of Minangkabau's to the Malay Peninsula area was getting more and more frequent. To begin with, the migration followed the rapid growth of gold trading from Minangkabau to Malacca. In the following centuries, the trade community had shifted from gold to paper, which then caused the people arriving from Minangkabau established settlement in Malacca. From Malacca, they reached other areas in the peninsula and start exploring more settlements. One of their destinations was an area in the north of Malacca, that is Negeri Sembilan. The Minangkabaus who did merantau to the Malay Peninsula were departing from 50 kota and tanah datar in Minangkabau, West Sumatra. The word Nagari came from Nagari. Negeri came from Nagari, which translated into stage in English, while the word Sembilan in Malay means 9 in English. The traditional dresses were central to the performance carried out during ceremonial events in West Sumatra, because these dresses showcase a number of meaningful cultural messages. There were certain rules to wear the dresses, such as on what occasion should we wear kebaya setengah tiang, or which dress were for elders only, and others. These rules were usually taught orally from one generation to another generation. The basic element of dresses might be quite similar or even the same, but there was still a slight of variations. The examples of different variation could be seen in the dress of penghulu or Nini Mama or the chief and the bundo kanduang dress. Penghulu is the leader of the tribe. He managed the people belonging to his tribe, which were basically his own close kin. In the Minang language, penghulu was an occupation that was recognized with the word Nini Mama. Some of the notable elements of penghulu dress were a headdress called salwa or destar, loosely fitted black blouse, a trouser, a sais called cawek, a cotton sarung like shawl called keciak, and ceremonial knife or keris. So, some other tribes would use a staff and songket sarung to cover the upper leg area. The bundo kanduang dress also had particular elements attached to it, such as a headdress called tengkulu, tanduk, or tengkulu ikat, a long blouse called baju kurung, a piece of sarung that was worn as the skirt, and a sais like shawl that was worn across the shoulder and the chest area. They combined this fine traditional dress with gold earrings, necklaces, and bangles. Other than two mentioned above, they also had daily attires for the elders and the young people that were consisted of similar elements. Both had a headdress called tengkulu and over the knee-length baju kurung and sarong as the skirt. The headdress for this daily attire was made of a cotton scarf wrapped around the head with both scarf ends facing back, while the sarong could be formed from the songket, velvet, or the batik cloth. And for the younger women, the elements were quite similar. The only differences between them were the additional accessories, such as paniaram necklace, rago-rago necklace, and or just as simple as set of beads necklace. Culture was meant to be fluid in order to fit the vessel. One of the fluid characteristics of culture could be seen in the design of Kebaya Setengah Tiang as the traditional dress of Negeri Sembilan, with embedded Minang characteristic. Unlike the Bondo Kanduang dress or the daily attire we had discussed prior to this chapter, Kebaya Setengah Tiang didn't use baju kurung as the blouse, but the kebaya or the long sleeve blouse with opening at the front and secured with gold brooches. The length of kebaya blouse was not as long as baju kurung, but both blouses were loosely fitted. The design of the kebaya was identical with commonly worn clothing in both Malay and Minang culture, as could be seen from the figure on screen. There were some opinions surfacing about the similarities between baju kurung and kebaya. Baju kurung were seen as a longer version of kebaya with no openings or buttons. Baju kurung was simply an evolution of the clothing etiquette of Minang women in regards to arrival of Islam in the east coast of Sumatra and the surrounding strait settlements. Islam required women to cover most of their body parts, which was called aurat, and to wear loose clothing to avoid showing body curves, and therefore kebaya evolved into baju kurung. Young women put this kebaya on almost every occasion, mostly as daily attire or to attend a wedding ceremony. They wore cotton kebaya with floral designs as a daily attire or to go farming, but wore brocade kebaya with songket to attend wedding ceremonies. It became a trend to wear kebaya setengah tiang in the 1950s because of its versatility. Kebaya setengah tiang was also worn by the aristocrats and the monarchs, such as Tunku Ampuan Durrah, Tunku Ampuan Kursiah, and Tunku Ampuan Najihah. The influence of Minang culture upon Negeri Sembilan was brought by the settled foreigners who migrated to the Malay Peninsula area after adopting of the three processes identified by Noor as identity reproduction, consisting of selective borrowing, mutual adaptation, and rearrangement of meaning. The three processes gave a new meaning to the way women of Negeri Sembilan dresses themselves. Kebaya setengah tiang was the product born out of this process, so that it was the result of identity reproduction of the assimilated Minang and Malay people in Negeri Sembilan. This process came from the extraction of the collective memory belonged to the people in Negeri Sembilan, preserving every information they remembered from time to time to transmit it to the future generation through oral tradition. Therefore, it could help our understanding about the relation and even the network or connection existent between Minangkawas and the Malay world. The collective memory became the sources of their interpretation of many cultural values molded into the elements of the dress. Specifically, we could see how tengkulu was also used as along with kebaya setengah tiang, and it had much deeper meaning than just being an accessory, let alone a headdress. Tengkulu became a symbol of the matrilineal system of the Minangkabaus. The adaptation process between Minang and Malay culture had manifest in a mutual arrangement of meaning and showcase on how fluid the society in the cultural level could have become. And this is our references. Thank you.